everybody, so lovely to see you, and thank you very much for joining me for my third video in this little series. Today the video is going to be all about Till Eulenspiegel. So, a tone poem written by Richard Strauss between 1894 and 1895. One of a set of 6 tone poems actually, and they were really influential pieces of music in the latter part of the 19th century, and really took program music to a different level. So programmatic music, music that follows a story, follows a theme. And Strauss really used themes that previously no one had thought would be suitable for music. So themes like literature, legend, philosophy, autobiography, all these things. And he did them in such an incredible way that he kind of really elevated this level and concept of realism. So the story of Till Eulenspiegel is basically about the merry pranks of a German peasant. So Till was a German folk hero, and in this story he does all manner of things. He rides his horse through the countryside, and he goes to the market tipping up all the wares of the market stall holders. He makes fun of people in the clergy, fun of academics. He flirts with people, chases the girls. But he gets his comeuppance, and he gets captured at the end and sentenced to death. So we have a funeral march, and then, despite Till desperately begging for his release, he gets hung and dies. The piece, however, ends with a sort of ghost of Till, or perhaps a notion that these sorts of characters will always return. They will never really die. So Till Eulenspiegel really created music that had never been heard before, and there were sort of passages of dissonance that shocked people. So as well as the programmatic side of the music, the actual tonality and use of orchestration that Strauss uses was also really quite dramatic. The next thing we're going to do is have a little think about the opening theme. So Till Eulenspiegel was the main character of this tone poem, and as we know, he was a prankster. He was a joker. But he was also a hero, and he's the hero of this story. Now, Strauss often used an arpeggio type structure and an arpeggio type theme to portray heroes. He did that a lot, and he does that here as well. So I'm going to play you the opening theme of Till Eulenspiegel, and then we will have a little bit more of a think about the structure of it, how we can go about learning it, and the key features of it. Well, that's basically the main excerpt from this piece, which is so familiar to so many people. Now, as discussed, this arpeggio feature of the hero comes back a lot, and actually it's probably the main thing that I would suggest focusing on when you're initially learning or practicing this excerpt. You can see that whole last section is based around an arpeggio. Now, what I would suggest is getting extremely good at your C major arpeggios. Start at the bottom, start at the top, whichever way round. want to just feel really comfortable with that, because when we do this theme and this excerpt in context, while you have a sort of free rein because the strings are just playing tremolo notes underneath you, there's a sort of tradition in the way that it sounds, and actually it doesn't necessarily sound the way it looks on the page. As I've shown you here, the music is actually in 6/8, but because we start on the second quaver of the bar, it sometimes tricks the mind a little bit. We can really feel like that D sharp is on the beat, whereas it actually comes on the 6th quaver, the 5th and then the 6th quaver of the bar respectively. Now, as you're playing this, you really need to have fun. That is the most important thing about this excerpt. It says piano, but you are completely on your own. This is completely your thing. Starts nice and slowly and then gradually speeds up so that by the time we hit the last 3 dotted crotchets, we're in tempo then, because that's where the orchestra kicks in. So the second part of the excerpt really needs to carry on in tempo. You have the complete flexibility and freedom at the beginning, but the second part of the excerpt really needs to keep in time. I hope lots of you go away and have a go at playing that excerpt, or if you're not a horn player, just really listen to those features that we were talking about. And as we're going to discuss in just a moment, the musical features of this whole tone poem come back again and again and again. I thought what might be interesting for us to do now is have a little bit of a look at how Strauss uses that opening theme throughout the piece, and also just a little bit more of a look into how he uses musical features to create these characters. Now, Till Eulenspiegel is a tone poem, as we discussed, but it's in a large-scale rondo form, which means that, a bit like we discussed in the Mozart horn concertos in an earlier video, the main theme returns again and again and again. But the difference here is that Strauss uses an idea called thematic transformation, which means that instead of the theme coming back exactly as it was before, he changes it each time. Now, the listener can still recognise the theme and understand the connection, but it's ever so slightly different. That's just one example there. Now, Till Eulenspiegel has two sides to his character. There's Till as the hero, which we've heard on the horn, and then we have Till as the prankster, which Strauss mainly portrays, well, initially portrays on the clarinet, but we'll also hear the horn doing it just a little bit later on. So the portrayal of the prankster is this theme. So really jokey, really jumpy, a really fun little sort of snippet of an excerpt. I just thought I'd play you now a passage quite early on in the piece where we can see how Strauss puts these two different parts together, so the hero and the prankster. one example of how he uses two themes and puts them together to create a real combination of characters. Strauss was really famous for doing very exciting and different orchestration, and often jumped quite dramatically between one section of the orchestra and another. Now, all these tone poems, he used a huge orchestra, so quite often you'd have 8 horns, for example. He'll use different sections of the orchestra for different characters as well. Now, for example, the academics that he makes fun of, he uses the bassoons for. The clergy he represents in the violas, and then the love theme is represented in the first violins. And Strauss often uses a very sort of chromatic and thickly scored love theme, which is always very different to his hero. And throughout Strauss's music, you can really hear that when he's trying to discuss or portray love, there'll be lots of lush chromaticisms throughout. But because Strauss loved the horn, he used the horns at lots of points during his music to really make us feel what part of the story we're in. And the famous chase where they're trying to catch Till before he gets sentenced to death is another one where we have all 8 horns playing together. So this is the chase. A real example of how Strauss uses the excitement and the energy in the music to portray a picture or an idea. Now Till gets caught and he gets hung, and we have the funeral march. And we've got the pizzicato strings to show his neck snapping as he gets hung. And then we have the beautiful epilogue. The epilogue at the end, which brings back the once upon a time theme that so many people like to call it in the strings at the very beginning. And I think that even here we can see how he's using the opening theme of Till in the horn, but in a very different way to show us that this is him, perhaps as a ghost, perhaps haunting us ever so slightly. So we can hear the link to the opening section. Those same notes, but Strauss so cleverly changes the rhythm slightly, makes it legato, makes it quiet, and could just create a whole different world. So we still know it's Till, but it's Till in a very different guise.